The heat was a physical thing. It pressed down from a bleached white sky and radiated up from the black ribbon of asphalt, a tangible weight on Stryker's shoulders. He felt it through his leather cut, through his skin, all the way into his bones. The engine of his Harley was a low, guttural thrum beneath him, the only sound for 100 miles in any direction save for the whisper of the wind. He had cut the engine an hour ago. Now there was only silence. A silence as vast and empty as the hole in his chest. He sat on the motionless bike, chrome glinting under the merciless sun, and stared at the shimmering horizon. This was his penance, his self-imposed exile from a world that kept spinning after his had stopped. Sarah was gone. 3 months, 4 days, and about 6 hours ago. The numbers were seared into his brain, a constant ticking clock marking the time since the light had gone out of his life. The club, his brothers, they had tried. They had surrounded him with their gruff comfort, their silent understanding, but grief was a solitary road. And Stryker had chosen the most solitary road he could find. He had been riding for 2 days, chasing nothing, running from everything. The hum of the road usually cleared his head, the vibration of the engine a familiar heartbeat that soothed the chaos inside. But not this time. This time, the silence that followed was louder than any engine. It screamed her name. It echoed with laughter he would never hear again. He squeezed his eyes shut, the leather of his gloves creaking. He was adrift, a ship without a rudder, a king without a kingdom. He was just a man, a broken man on a lonely highway. A broken man on a lonely highway, who slowly became aware of a new shape shimmering in the heat haze behind him. It was small at first, a dark smudge against the pale brown of the desert. He watched it in his mirror, his eyes narrowed. It grew slowly, resolving into the shape of an old pickup truck, listing slightly to one side, trailing a faint wisp of steam. It crawled along, a wounded animal dragging itself across the sand. Then, with a final pathetic cough of black smoke, it died. It rolled to a stop about 100 yards behind him on the shoulder. Stryker watched. He did nothing. It was not his problem. He had enough of his own. The world could burn for all he cared. He had already lost his world. He saw a door creak open on the driver's side. An old man, stooped and frail, wearing a sweat-stained straw hat, got out. He moved with the slow, pained deliberation of age, his back a permanent question mark. The old man stared at the front of his truck, then took off his hat and wiped his brow with the back of a trembling hand. He looked lost. He looked utterly, hopelessly lost. And Stryker felt a flicker of something. Not pity, not yet. Just a dull recognition. He knew that look. He saw it in his own reflection every morning. The man looked up and down the empty highway. His gaze landed on Stryker, on the massive bike, the leather, the club patches that screamed danger to most civilized folk. The old man's shoulders slumped even further. He had traded one hopeless situation for another. Then the passenger door opened. A small head of blonde hair popped out. A little girl, no older than 7 or 8, climbed down from the cab. She wore a bright yellow sundress that was an impossible splash of color in the monochrome landscape. She held a worn, one-eyed teddy bear by the arm. She looked at her grandfather, then she looked at Stryker. Her eyes, wide and blue, held no fear, only curiosity. Stryker's breath hitched in his throat. For a split second, the sun and the grief and the heat played a cruel trick on him. For a split second, he saw Sarah. Not as she was at the end, but as a child, in a photograph he kept tucked in his wallet. A little girl in a yellow dress, smiling a gap-toothed smile. The illusion shattered, leaving behind an ache that was sharper than before. He gritted his teeth. This was not his problem. He was about to kickstart the bike, to roar away from this mirage and the ghosts it carried. But the little girl took a step forward. Her grandfather put a hand on her shoulder. "Stay here, Lily," he rasped, his voice thin and dry. "Just stay here." But Lily's eyes were locked on Stryker. She saw the chrome and the leather, the long hair and the beard weathered by wind and sun. She saw the patches of his club, the skulls and the reapers that made grown men cross the street. And she smiled. A small, tentative smile. Something inside Stryker broke. Some wall he had been building, brick by painful brick, crumbled into dust. He swung a leg over his bike, and the heavy leather of his boots crunched on the gravel of the shoulder. He walked toward them. Each step was a deliberate act of will, a fight against the instinct to flee, to hide back inside his shell of sorrow. The old man tensed, pulling the little girl behind him. He was ready to defend her with what little strength he had left. He saw a monster approaching, but the little girl peeked out from behind his legs. She was not afraid. She trusted what she saw in a way the old man could not. "Your motorcycle is very shiny," she said, her voice clear as a bell in the oppressive silence. Stryker stopped a few feet away. He looked down at her, his face an unreadable mask. He hadn't spoken to anyone but gas station attendants and bartenders in 2 days. His voice, when it came, was rough from disuse. "It's called chrome." "Chrome," she repeated, tasting the word. "I like it." The old man, Arthur, finally spoke. "Sir, we don't want any trouble. Our truck, it's just, she's given up the ghost." Stryker's gaze shifted to him. He saw the desperation in the old man's eyes, the fear, but underneath it, the fierce, protective love for his granddaughter. "Where are you headed?" Stryker asked, his tone flat. "Town called Redemption. Supposed to be about 30 miles up the road. My sister's there. We're going to live with her." 30 miles. In this heat, on foot, it was a death sentence, especially for a child and an old man. Stryker looked at the sky, then at the wisp of steam still rising from the dead truck. He looked at the girl, who was now staring at the large, intricate tattoo of a soaring eagle on his forearm. He thought of Sarah. He thought of the promise he had made to her, a lifetime ago, that he would always be a good man, no matter what colors he wore on his back. He had been failing that promise. Lost in his own darkness. But now a small light had appeared on the horizon. A little girl in a yellow dress. He made a decision. It was the first real decision he had made in 3 months. "The truck's not going anywhere," he stated, the words hanging in the dry air. "I'll take you." Arthur stared at him, dumbfounded. You will. Get what you need, 1 bag." Stryker turned and walked back to his bike without waiting for an answer. The command was absolute. It left no room for argument. Arthur hesitated for only a moment before scrambling to the back of the truck, pulling out a small, battered suitcase. Lily, however, ran right up to the bike, her little hand reaching out to gently touch the cool leather of the seat. "Wow," she breathed. Stryker watched her in his mirror. He saw the innocence, the pure, unfiltered wonder. It was a language he had forgotten how to speak. He busied himself, strapping the small suitcase to his luggage rack. Arthur approached, carrying a canteen of water. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Stryker," he supplied, his voice still gravel. "Thank you, Stryker. You're a godsend." Stryker didn't feel like a godsend. He felt like a ghost. But he nodded curtly. He unstrapped his own helmet from the back of the bike. It was a spare, one Sarah had worn. It was smaller, plain black. He knelt down, the leather of his pants groaning in protest. He was now eye level with Lily. "This is for you," he said, holding it out. "It's the law, and it's the rule." Lily's eyes went wide. She looked at the helmet as if it were a crown. She allowed him to place it gently on her head. It was too big, wobbling slightly, but she just giggled. The sound was like a splash of cool water in the desert of his soul. He cinched the strap so it was snug. "There," he said, "now you're a rider." He then looked at Arthur. "She'll ride with me. You can hold on behind her." It was the only way. The bike was big, but not that big. The old man looked terrified at the prospect, but he nodded. He trusted this stranger. He had no other choice. Climbing onto the powerful machine was an ordeal for him, but Stryker waited patiently. Finally, they were all settled. The little girl in front of him, her small back pressed against his chest. The old man behind her, his frail hands gripping her shoulders. Stryker could feel the tremor in them. He took a deep breath. The scent of her shampoo, something like strawberries, filled his senses. It was so different from the usual smells of oil and road dust. He twisted the throttle, and the Harley roared to life, a sudden, violent explosion of sound that shattered the desert silence. The old man flinched. Lily just gasped in delight. "Hold on tight," Stryker commanded. He eased the clutch, and the bike rolled smoothly onto the asphalt. They moved forward, leaving the dead truck and a piece of Stryker's solitude behind them. The wind whipped past them, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like it was scouring him raw. It felt clean. Lily leaned back against him, perfectly at ease, her helmeted head resting against the worn leather of his cut. Through the fabric, he could feel her trust. It was a heavier weight than he had carried in years. He had a mission again. It wasn't a club mission. It wasn't about territory or rivals. It was simpler, purer. Get the old man and the little girl to redemption. 30 miles. He could do that. He could be a good man for 30 miles. The town of Redemption appeared on the horizon exactly when it was supposed to. It was a small, dusty collection of single-story buildings, huddled together as if for protection against the vast emptiness surrounding them. A water tower with the town's name painted in peeling letters stood sentinel. It looked tired. The whole town looked tired. As they rolled down the main street, curtains twitched in windows. People on the sidewalk stopped and stared. They didn't see a man helping a family. They saw a biker, a symbol of everything they feared, with a child held captive. Stryker felt the weight of their judgment. He was used to it. It was part of the life he chose. But today, it felt different. It felt unjust. He was protecting this child, not endangering her. He pulled up in front of the only diner in town, the sign a faded picture of a smiling coffee cup. "Rosie's," he read. "We'll get some water. Figure out where your sister lives," he said to Arthur. He helped them off the bike. Lily took off the helmet, her hair a static-charged halo around her head. She looked up at him with adoration. "Can we do that again?" she asked. A ghost of a smile touched Stryker's lips. "Maybe later, kid." He placed a hand on her shoulder and guided her and her grandfather toward the diner door. The bell above it jingled, announcing their arrival. The conversations inside didn't just stop. They were sliced clean in half. A fork clattered onto a plate. Every eye in the small, crowded room swiveled toward them, toward him. The fear was a palpable thing, thick as the smell of stale coffee and grease. A waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a name tag that read Gloria, froze with a pot of coffee in her hand. Stryker ignored them all. He led Arthur and Lily to an empty booth in the corner, the vinyl cracked and taped over in several places. "Go ahead, sit," he said, his voice a low rumble. He remained standing, a sentinel watching over his charges, his back to the wall. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering on each face for a moment. They quickly looked away, back at their plates, at their coffee cups, anywhere but at him. He was an apex predator that had just walked into a field of sheep. And the sheep were terrified. Gloria the waitress finally approached, her movements stiff and cautious. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "3 waters, and a menu," Stryker said. He didn't look at her, his attention still on the room. Lily, oblivious to the tension, was tracing the patterns in the cracked vinyl with her finger. Arthur just looked exhausted, the journey and the stress having taken their toll. "Thank you again," the old man whispered. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," Stryker replied, the words more for himself than for Arthur. Just as the waitress returned with the waters, the diner door jingled again. A man walked in, and the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The fear didn't vanish, but it was replaced by a different kind of tension, a practiced deference. The man was in his late 50s, dressed in a crisp, expensive-looking suit that was wildly out of place in the dusty diner. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his smile was wide and practiced, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were cold, like chips of ice. "Gloria, the usual, my dear," he boomed, his voice overly friendly. He clapped a man on the shoulder as he passed, his progress through the diner like a royal procession. The townspeople smiled back, but their smiles were strained. This man held power here, that much was obvious. His name, Stryker would soon learn, was Mr. Croft. He owned the bank, the general store, and half the land the town was built on. He was the king of this tired little kingdom. His gaze swept the room and landed on Stryker's booth. He paused. His eyes took in the scene. The hulking biker, the weary old man, and the beautiful little girl. His practiced smile tightened. He changed his course, striding over to their table with an air of proprietary concern. "Well now, what have we here?" he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Folks, are you all right? This gentleman isn't bothering you, is he?" Stryker turned his head slowly to face him. He said nothing. He simply looked at Croft, his eyes as hard and unyielding as granite. Arthur, flustered, quickly spoke up. "Oh, no, sir, not at all. This man Stryker, he's a hero. He saved us. Our truck broke down out on the highway." Croft's gaze flickered to Stryker, a flash of annoyance in his eyes before the mask of charm slipped back into place. "Is that so? A good Samaritan. How unexpected." He then focused his attention entirely on Lily, and the way he looked at her made the hairs on the back of Stryker's neck stand up. It was a hungry look, a possessive one. "And who is this pretty little thing?" he asked, his voice softening to a sickly sweet tone. "What's your name, darling?" Lily shrank back against the vinyl seat, pressing closer to her grandfather. She didn't like this man. Her instincts were screaming, and Stryker's were screaming right along with them. "Her name is Lily," Arthur said, placing a protective arm around her. "And we're just here to meet my sister." "Your sister?" Croft feigned surprise. "Who might that be? I know everyone in this town." "Martha Gable," Arthur replied. A strange look crossed Croft's face. It was there and gone in an instant, but Stryker saw it. "Martha Gable," Croft repeated slowly. "I'm afraid you must be mistaken. Martha passed away over a year ago. I'm so sorry to be the one to tell you." The color drained from Arthur's face. "No," he whispered. "That can't be. I just got a letter from her last week. She said she had a room ready for us." He fumbled in his coat pocket, his hands shaking, and produced a creased envelope. Croft took it, his eyes scanning the contents. "Ah," he said with a sigh of mock pity, "this address isn't even real. It's an empty lot out by the old quarry. Someone has played a cruel trick on you, my friend." The old man looked utterly broken. His last hope, his safe harbor, had just evaporated into thin air. He was stranded, with his granddaughter, in a town where he knew no one, with no money and no prospects. Croft saw his opportunity. He placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder, a gesture of false sympathy. "Don't you worry," he said smoothly. "I'm Mr. Croft. I take care of the people in this town. You and your lovely granddaughter can come with me. I have a guest house. You can stay as long as you need. I can even find some work for you." It was too perfect, too generous. A wolf offering shelter to a lamb. Stryker had seen this play before. He stepped forward, placing himself between Croft and the booth. "They're with me," he said, his voice a low growl. The words were a line drawn in the sand. The entire diner went silent again, waiting for the explosion. Croft's smile finally vanished. His eyes narrowed into slits. "I beg your pardon," he hissed, dropping the friendly facade. "I don't think I caught that." "I said," Stryker repeated, his voice dangerously calm, "they're with me. They won't be needing your hospitality." The challenge was unmistakable. The king of redemption had just been defied by a leather-clad vagrant. "You have no say in this," Croft sneered. "He is her grandfather. He makes the decisions." He turned to Arthur, his voice once again dripping with false concern. "My dear man, you can't possibly think it's safe for this child to be around someone like him. Look at him. He's a criminal, a savage. I am offering you a safe, clean place to stay, a real future." Arthur looked from the well-dressed, powerful man to the intimidating biker who had shown him nothing but kindness. He was confused, scared, and exhausted. But before he could answer, Lily spoke. She had been quiet, watching, listening. Her small voice cut through the tension like a knife. "I want to stay with Stryker," she said, her chin held high. "He's my friend. You're scary." The simple, honest declaration of a child was more devastating than any threat. Croft's face contorted with rage for a split second before he smoothed it back into a mask of indignation. The mask was slipping. The mask was slipping, and Stryker pressed his advantage. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. "You heard the lady," he said. "Now, I think it's time for you to leave." Croft looked around the diner, at the faces of the townspeople. He expected them to back him up, to rally to their leader, but he saw only fear. They were afraid of Stryker, yes, but they were also afraid of him, and for the first time, someone was standing up to him. A flicker of hope was lit in their eyes. "This is my town," Croft spat, his voice low and venomous. "You'll regret this. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "And you have no idea who you're dealing with," Stryker countered, his voice like the scrape of steel on stone. He took a half-step closer. Croft, for all his bluster, was a coward. He was used to intimidating the weak and the isolated. He was not used to facing a man who had no fear left in him. He took an involuntary step back. He had lost. He knew it. He had been publicly humiliated. With a final hateful glare, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the diner, the bell jangling furiously behind him. The collective breath of the diner was released in a single, quiet sigh. The immediate danger had passed, but Stryker knew this was far from over. Men like Croft didn't just walk away. They schemed. They retaliated. He had not just made an enemy, he had declared a war. Stryker turned back to the booth. Arthur looked pale, his hands still shaking. Lily, however, was beaming. She had faced the monster, and, with her knight beside her, she had won. Stryker knew he couldn't leave them now. His 30-mile mission had just become something much, much bigger. He sat down opposite them, the worn vinyl groaning under his weight. "We need a plan," he said. He pulled out his phone, a rugged, heavy-duty piece of equipment. He scrolled through his contacts, past names like Sledge, Reaper, and Chaos, until he found the one he was looking for, Ghost. He hit the call button. It was answered on the first ring. "Yeah, Stryker?" The voice on the other end was young, sharp, and all business. "I need a favor, Ghost. A big one." "Name it," Ghost replied without hesitation. That was the way of the club. A brother asked, you answered. No questions, no delays. Stryker explained the situation in clipped, precise sentences. The town, the old man and the girl, the letter, and the man named Croft. "I need to know everything about him," Stryker concluded. "And I mean everything. The real story. I've got a bad feeling about this guy." "Mr. Croft, Town of Redemption," Ghost repeated. "Give me an hour. I'll peel him like an onion." The line went dead. 1 hour. Now they had to wait. Stryker looked around the diner. The patrons were still watching, but the fear in their eyes was now mixed with a grudging respect. Gloria, the waitress, came over, this time with a fresh pot of coffee. She filled Stryker's mug without him asking. "That man," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "He's owned this town for too long. Be careful." Stryker just nodded. He understood. The whole town was a victim, trapped in Croft's web. He had just torn a hole in it, and the spider was angry. He turned his attention back to Arthur and Lily. "We're going to get you something to eat," he said. It was a simple statement, but it was a promise of normalcy, of safety, in a world that had suddenly turned upside down. For the next hour, they ate. Stryker ordered pancakes for Lily, who devoured them with a happy grin, syrup smearing her cheeks. He made sure Arthur ate a full meal, watching as some of the color returned to the old man's face. He learned their story. Arthur's wife, Lily's grandmother, had passed away 6 months ago. They had lost their farm. The letter from his sister Martha had been their only hope. Now, he knew it had been a lie, a lure. Croft had somehow known about his situation. He had targeted them. He had brought them here for a reason. And Stryker was grimly certain that reason was centered on the innocent little girl, now happily drawing on a napkin with a borrowed crayon. She drew a picture of a big black motorcycle. Next to it, she drew a very large man with a beard and a smiley face. And next to him, she drew a little girl in a yellow dress holding his hand. She pushed the napkin across the table to him. "That's you," she said, pointing a syrupy finger. "You're the knight." Stryker looked at the childish drawing. A knight. He hadn't felt like a knight in a very long time. He felt like a ruin. But this little girl, she didn't see the broken parts. She saw a protector. He carefully folded the napkin and tucked it into the breast pocket of his cut over his heart. It felt heavier than any metal. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Ghost. It contained a single attachment, a heavily redacted police file from another state, and one sentence, jackpot. His real name is Martin Thorne. Check page 4. Stryker opened the file. His face hardened as he read. Martin Thorne, a former youth counselor from a town called Cedar Springs, accused of multiple counts of misconduct involving minors. The case had been dropped. Key witnesses had recanted their testimony. Files were sealed. It reeked of money, of influence, of threats. Thorne had disappeared, only to re-emerge here in this forgotten town as Mr. Croft, a wealthy benefactor, a wolf who had found a new flock of sheep. He now had the truth, a weapon more powerful than any fist or blade. Just then, the diner door opened again. It was the town sheriff, a portly man with a nervous twitch and eyes that wouldn't meet anyone else's. He walked over to their table, his hand hovering near the butt of his pistol. "Stryker?" he said, his voice shaky. "Mr. Croft has filed a complaint. Harassment, threats. He wants you out of his town." "His town?" Stryker asked, not moving from his seat. "Is that what this is?" The sheriff swallowed hard. "He's an important man here. He wants you to leave, now. And the old man and the girl, they're to go with social services until we can sort this out." "That's not going to happen," Stryker said, his voice flat and cold. He stood up slowly, his sheer size eclipsing the nervous lawman. The entire diner held its breath. "I'm not asking," the sheriff stammered, his bravado failing him. "It's for the girl's own good." "Her own good?" Stryker's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. "You want to talk about what's good for children, Sheriff? Let's talk about a man named Martin Thorne, from a town called Cedar Springs. Does that name ring any bells?" The sheriff's face went white. He knew. Of course he knew. He was in Croft's pocket. He was part of the sickness that had infected this town. I don't know what you're talking about," he blustered. "I think you do," Stryker said. He held up his phone, showing the sheriff the first page of the police file. The name, Martin Thorne, was clearly visible. The sheriff's eyes widened in panic. His authority, built on a foundation of lies and fear, was crumbling before his eyes. "You have no proof," he whispered. "Don't I?" Stryker asked. Just then, the roar of multiple motorcycles filled the air outside, a deep, thunderous sound that vibrated through the floor of the diner. A moment later, the door swung open and 5 more members of Stryker's club walked in. At the front was Bear, a man who lived up to his name, broad as a doorway and just as solid. Behind him was Doc, his cut adorned with a combat medic patch, his eyes sharp and intelligent. And Raven, the club's only female member, her dark hair braided down her back, her expression fierce and protective. They filled the entrance, a wall of leather and resolve. They didn't say a word. They just stood there, their eyes locked on Stryker, waiting for his command. The sheriff looked at Stryker, then at the silent, imposing figures blocking the only exit. He looked at the faces of the townspeople, who were no longer cowering, but watching with a newfound boldness. The balance of power in redemption had just shifted, permanently. The sheriff's hand dropped from his gun. He was a man who knew which way the wind was blowing, and right now, it was a hurricane. The standoff was broken by the screech of tires outside. A sleek black car pulled up, and Mr. Croft, or Martin Thorne, got out. He saw the row of Harleys lined up like metal war horses. He saw the bikers filling the diner entrance. His face, once smug and confident, was now a mask of pure fury. The game was up, and he knew it. He stormed toward the diner, intent on one last, desperate act of control. He burst through the door, shoving past Raven. "What is the meaning of this? Sheriff, arrest this filth!" he screamed, his voice cracking. But the sheriff didn't move. He was staring at Stryker's phone, at the damning evidence it held. "It's over, Croft," Stryker said, his voice cutting through the man's tirade. Or should I say, Thorne. The name hit him like a physical blow. He froze, his face a canvas of shock and terror. The mask was not just slipping anymore, it had been utterly shattered. In that moment, everyone in the diner saw him for what he truly was. Not a benefactor, not a leader, a predator, a coward. His composure broke completely. His eyes, wild with panic, darted to Lily, who was now safely shielded behind Bear's massive frame. "She's mine!" he shrieked, a raw, animal sound of entitlement. "I brought them here! They belong to me!" He made a desperate lunge for the booth, for the girl. It was a foolish, fatal mistake. He never made it. Bear's arm shot out, not with a punch, but with an open palm that connected with Croft's chest. It was like a mule kick. The air rushed out of Croft's lungs, and he staggered backward, landing in a heap on the grimy linoleum floor. He lay there, gasping and pathetic, the great man of redemption, reduced to a whimpering mess. It was over. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a desperate, sniveling fear. Doc knelt beside Lily, his voice calm and gentle. "Are you okay, little one? Did he scare you?" Lily peeked around Bear's leg. She looked at the man on the floor, then up at the ring of leather-clad giants surrounding her. She shook her head. "No," she said, her voice small but firm. "My knights are here." The sheriff, finally spurred to action, stepped forward and pulled out his handcuffs. His hands were shaking, but he did his duty. He hauled the disgraced man to his feet. "Martin Thorne," he said, the name tasting like poison in his mouth. "You're under arrest." As he was led away, a disgrace, the townspeople in the diner did something remarkable. They started to clap. A slow, hesitant applause at first, which then grew in volume and confidence. They weren't clapping for the sheriff. They were clapping for the bikers, for the monsters who had turned out to be saviors. The immediate crisis was over, but Stryker's work was not done. A circle of protection had been formed, and it had to be maintained. While the sheriff dealt with the legal fallout, a process that would be aided by a mountain of evidence Ghost was already emailing him, the club turned its attention to Arthur and Lily. Their immediate needs were simple: a place to stay, a sense of security. The club provided both. They didn't take them to a motel. Raven, her maternal instincts kicking in, declared that unacceptable. Instead, they spoke to Gloria, the waitress. She, like many in town, had lived in fear of Croft. She owned a small boarding house that Croft had been trying to squeeze her out of for years. With him gone, she felt a weight lift. "They can stay with me," she offered, her voice thick with emotion. "For as long as they need, no charge." The club members descended upon the boarding house. Bear checked every lock on every door and window, reinforcing them. Doc gave both Arthur and Lily a gentle checkup, ensuring the stress and dehydration hadn't taken a serious toll. The other members went on a supply run, returning not with beer and junk food, but with groceries, new clothes for Arthur, and a giant fluffy teddy bear for Lily to replace her worn, one-eyed friend. They moved with a quiet, efficient purpose that spoke of years of practice. They were a family, and for now, Arthur and Lily were part of that family. That evening, as Lily slept soundly in a warm, safe bed for the first time in weeks, Stryker sat with Arthur on the front porch of the boarding house. The desert air had cooled, and the sky was a blanket of brilliant stars. For a long time, they sat in a comfortable silence. "I don't understand," Arthur finally said, his voice filled with awe. "Why? Why would you do all of this for strangers?" Stryker stared out into the darkness. He thought of Sarah. He thought of the emptiness that had driven him out onto that highway. He thought of the little girl who had called him a knight. "We have a code," he began, his voice low. "Protect those who can't protect themselves, especially women and children. A lot of us, we didn't have anyone to do that for us when we were kids. We know what it's like to be scared, to be helpless." He paused, the next words costing him more than the old man would ever know. "I lost my wife a few months ago," he said, the admission a raw wound. "She was the best person I ever knew. She made me promise to be a good man. I think I forgot how. Until today. Your granddaughter, she reminded me." He reached into his cut and pulled out the folded napkin with the crayon drawing. He looked at it under the dim porch light. "She reminded me that there's still good in the world worth fighting for." Arthur reached out and placed a trembling hand on Stryker's leather-clad arm. "You are a good man, Stryker," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Don't you ever doubt that." In that moment, a bond was forged, not just of gratitude, but of deep mutual respect. the wounded healer and the man he had saved, finding solace in each other's company. The club stayed in Redemption for a week. They made sure Croft, or Thorne, was well and truly buried by the legal system, with state investigators arriving to reopen the old case from Cedar Springs. His reign of terror was over for good. But they did more than that. They helped the town heal. They used their resources, calling in favors, to help the people Croft had exploited. They helped Gloria secure the deed to her boarding house, free and clear. They found out the local garage was about to go under because of a predatory loan from Croft's bank. The club paid it off and offered Arthur, a retired mechanic, a job running it. They breathed life back into the town that fear had almost choked to death. On their last day, they held a small ceremony on the porch. Stryker knelt before Lily. Raven handed him a small package. Inside was a tiny leather vest, a perfect miniature of their own cuts. On the back, in bright, sparkling letters, was the name Lily, and below it, a single patch that read Princess. "You're one of us now," Stryker said, his voice rough with emotion as he helped her put it on. "An honorary member. That means you've always got family. You ever need anything, you call us. We'll come, no matter where, no matter when." Lily threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his beard. "Thank you, Uncle Stryker," she whispered. The name settled into his heart, filling a space that had been cold and empty for too long. He was no longer just a grieving husband. He was Uncle Stryker. He was a knight. A year passed. The town of Redemption was transformed. It was no longer a tired, dusty place living in the shadow of a tyrant. It was vibrant, hopeful. The garage, with Arthur at the helm, was thriving. Rosie's diner had a new coat of paint, and proudly displayed on the wall behind the counter was a framed photograph of a group of imposing bikers smiling with a little girl in a tiny leather vest. The bikers were no longer feared in Redemption. They were legends. They were guardians. Lily was thriving most of all. She was happy, healthy, and safe, surrounded by the love of her grandfather and an entire town that adored her. She excelled in school, her drawings of knights and motorcycles winning local art awards. She never lost the fearless spark in her eye, the one that had seen a hero where everyone else saw a monster. And Stryker? He was transformed too. The hole in his chest was still there. It would always be there, but it was no longer a void of despair. It was filled with purpose, with love. The memory of Sarah was no longer just a source of pain. It was a guiding light, a reminder of the good he was capable of. He led his club not with just strength, but with a quiet wisdom that his brothers had come to rely on more than ever. One sunny afternoon, Stryker led his club down that same stretch of desert highway. They were riding out, on their way to help another family in another town who had sent out a desperate call. Taped to the handlebars of his gleaming Harley was a slightly faded, crayon-drawn picture of a knight and a little girl. As they roared past the spot where an old pickup truck had once broken down, Stryker glanced at the drawing, and a genuine smile touched his lips. He had been lost in the desert of his own grief, a broken man on a lonely road. But then, a little girl in a yellow dress had appeared, and in saving her, he had finally, truly, found his own way home.